And I'm wrestling with it here because I don't think there's a single answer. I can only think about how games do it poorly or don't do it at all, and that's kind of how most games handle slavery. I think is to either have it as a completely abstracted, for example, slavery, as a completely abstracted system that is essentially a kind of economic function, and like everything else in the game, especially a game like Europa Universalis is sort of an actuarial symbol, and kind of leaves the question to the player to ignore or to engage with. I haven't played enough of Europa Universalis 4 to remember exactly how they represent slavery, but I mean, you can have like textual things being like, "Oh, slavery's bad," or whatever, or coming back to the problem of the player, and like Gavoon says, like, how do you do this in such a way that you aren't forcing the player into uncomfortable choices? I mean, maybe sometimes that's what you want to do. Maybe a sensitive representation of these subjects, as provocative or not, might force the player into making these kinds of moral choices. But then you run into the problem of the bad actor, right? What if someone wants to be an SS officer running the trains to Birkenau? What do you do about that? Or someone who wants to be shipping enslaved people across the Atlantic. How do you prevent them from taking pleasure from something which you are trying to convey as immoral? And, I don't know. Some of these things I don't think you can prevent entirely. I mean, especially because games can be modded in various ways, and these things can be put in against the will of the developers anyhow. But I think ultimately, and this has been a very bumbling and very circumlocutionary response. I think ultimately it comes down to, what is it that the game designers want this system or this representation to achieve? And I think they have to think very hard and very carefully about why it needs to be included, or why they're choosing to remove it, because I think the problem with slavery usually is dealt with by not having it in ways that are end up being historically absurd, whether it comes through kind of prefatory remarks, whether it comes through some kind of tooltip, or it comes through a disincentive in using that system, or I don't know what. The contextualization that you have for how slavery or how the Holocaust is represented in the game can go a long way to putting down the marker, as it were, of the developers and saying, this is why we have it, this is what we hope for it to achieve. We can't control what the player does, but this is what we intend for this to do. I mean, I'm not sure what more you can do with that other than include it or not include it and change the mechanics of the game appropriately. I'm really sorry. That's a horrible response. It's a very muddled response, but it's a problem that has not been resolved in whether it's in the games themselves or in the literature about the game.